Pregnant? How convenient. Name your price, the millionaire CEO sneered. 8 years later, he saw her at a gala with twin girls who had his eyes. Anna had rehearsed the words over and over again on her way to Andrew Miller's office, gripping the small white stick in her handbag as if it were both a weapon and a fragile treasure. The glass towers of his headquarters glittered under the sun, intimidating in their grandeur, and the polished marble floors reflected her uncertain steps as she entered the reception area. She had been here before, waiting to meet him after long days when his business swallowed his time, but today everything felt different. She carried life inside her, something that should have been cause for joy, and she held on to that thought as she walked through the doors of his office. Andrew was behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, his brown eyes scanning a report as if nothing in the world could disturb his focus. His dark hair fell casually across his forehead, his suit pressed and immaculate, and he looked every bit the man of power that the magazines adored. She stood there for a moment, waiting for him to look up, but when he did, his expression barely shifted. "Well?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. Anna's heart hammered in her chest, and her mouth felt dry, but she drew a steadying breath and held out the test. "Andrew. I'm pregnant," she said softly. For a fleeting instant she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something almost vulnerable, but it vanished so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. He set down his pen, leaned back farther in his chair, and a smile curved his lips. It was not the smile of a man surprised with joy, but the smirk of someone who saw only leverage. "Pregnant? How convenient," he drawled, his tone dripping with condescension. "How much do you want?" His words cut deeper than she expected, sharper than any argument they had ever had. She blinked, unable to process what she had just heard. "What?" she whispered, the word breaking on her tongue. Andrew stood then, walking around his desk with the slow confidence of a man used to control, his gaze fixed on her not with love or concern but with calculation. "You came here because you think this changes something," he said, his voice low and cold. "It doesn't. I have no interest in being tied down with a child. But if money will solve this problem, name your price." Anna felt her throat tighten, her chest burning with a mix of disbelief and fury. "She's not a problem," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "This is our child. A life. You can't just throw money at me and make it disappear." For a moment she hoped her words would pierce through his arrogance, that he would see the woman standing before him, scared but determined, and remember the love they once shared. Instead, he laughed softly, shaking his head as if she were naive. "Don't be dramatic, Anna. You're young, you'll move on. Take what I offer and make it easier on both of us." Her hands curled into fists at her sides, and she fought to hold back tears. Every dream she had nurtured in the quiet of her heart, the dream of them raising a family, of building something real together, shattered in the space of seconds. His office, with its glass walls and gleaming surfaces, suddenly felt suffocating, the cold perfection pressing in on her. She realized then that the man she loved was gone, or perhaps had never existed at all beyond her hopes. When she finally spoke again, her voice was raw but resolute. "I don't want your money, Andrew. I never did. I wanted you. But now I see the truth. I don't need you. I will raise this child alone, and I will never let her believe she wasn't wanted." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time his smirk faltered, though he said nothing. She turned on her heel, her hand shaking as she gripped the door handle, and walked out without looking back. The echo of his words followed her down the corridor like a curse, but as she pressed her hand to her stomach, a new determination rose inside her. He could sneer and dismiss her, he could try to reduce her child to a transaction, but he would never take away the choice she had made. She would keep her babies, and she would fight for them with every ounce of strength she had. The first weeks after Anna walked out of Andrew's office were some of the hardest of her life. She returned to her modest apartment, a place that already felt too small for one person, and tried to comprehend how she was going to care for a child on her own. The fear gnawed at her constantly, whispering that she wasn't strong enough, that she would fail, that the man she had loved had abandoned her and left her with nothing but a fragile hope inside her. Yet every time she placed her hand over her stomach, she felt a flicker of courage that refused to die. She was not carrying despair, she was carrying life, and she promised herself that she would protect it no matter what. As the months passed, her body began to change, and so did her perspective. At her first appointment, when the doctor placed the cold gel on her stomach and the screen lit up with a blurry image, Anna held her breath. She was expecting to see one small shape, but instead there were two. The doctor smiled gently, explaining that she was having twins. For a moment Anna's heart stopped, and she felt the world tilt around her. 2 children. Not one, but 2 lives that would depend on her, love her, and need her. The weight of it was overwhelming, but so was the miracle of it. She cried quietly in that room, a mix of terror and joy, whispering to herself that she would find a way, even if it cost her everything. The pregnancy was grueling. Anna had never been wealthy, but now her resources were stretched to the breaking point. She took double shifts at the small cafe where she worked, standing on her feet until her ankles swelled, forcing herself to smile at customers while exhaustion pulled at every muscle. When her uniform grew too tight, she bought a larger one from a thrift shop, altering it herself late at night by the dim light of a lamp. The money barely covered rent and food, and yet she started saving small amounts for diapers, blankets, and bottles. She collected hand-me-downs from neighbors, washed them carefully, and folded them neatly in a drawer, imagining her babies one day wearing the tiny clothes. Loneliness haunted her most at night. She would lie in bed, hands resting on her growing belly, and whisper to the twins, telling them stories about the world, promising them she would never leave them, that they would never be unwanted. She wondered if they could hear her, if they could feel the love she already carried for them. When she felt their first kicks, tears streamed down her face as laughter broke through her exhaustion. In that moment, she no longer cared about Andrew's rejection or the cruelty of his words. She was not worthless, and neither were they. Together, they were already a family. The day of their birth was long and agonizing, a blur of pain and fear. The hospital room was stark and filled with the hum of machines, the bright lights pressing down on her as contractions racked her body. There was no hand to hold, no whispered encouragement from a partner, only nurses and doctors speaking briskly as she screamed and clung to the rails of the bed. Hours stretched endlessly, and just when she thought she couldn't endure another moment, the room filled with the sound of a baby's cry. Then another. 2 voices, 2 lives, piercing the sterile air and filling it with something sacred. When the nurses placed the swaddled infants in her arms, Anna broke down completely. She looked from one tiny face to the other, both nearly identical, with wisps of brown hair and eyes that opened slowly to reveal the same deep brown as Andrew's. Her heart clenched painfully, but not from regret, from awe. She kissed each small forehead, whispering their names through her tears, Emily and Emma. Holding them, she felt something shift inside her. The world could be cruel, men could betray, money could vanish, but this love was unshakable. Anna left the hospital days later with her arms full and her future uncertain. She had no partner, no wealth, no safety net, but she had her daughters, and they had her. And as she carried them into the tiny apartment that would now be their home, she swore to herself that she would never let Andrew's cold dismissal define them. They were not mistakes, and they were not burdens. They were her purpose, her light, and from that moment on, every decision she made would be for them. The first years with Emily and Emma were both the most exhausting and the most meaningful of Anna's life. Her small apartment quickly transformed into a nursery and playroom, with cribs pushed against one wall and stacks of diapers and bottles lined up wherever there was space. The cries of two infants often overlapped, one needing her just as she finished soothing the other, and Anna learned to move with a rhythm that never allowed for rest. She would rock one baby in her arms while the other kicked and fussed in the crib, humming lullabies she barely remembered from her own childhood. Sleep became a luxury she could only steal in short bursts, her body aching from the constant demands, but even when exhaustion blurred her vision and her arms trembled from holding both daughters at once, she never once considered giving up. Her financial situation was dire, but necessity pushed her into resourcefulness. During the day she worked at the cafe, leaving the girls with a kind neighbor who agreed to watch them for a small fee. At night she returned home, slipping out of her uniform to feed, bathe, and cradle her daughters before collapsing into bed with them nestled beside her. There were weeks when she skipped meals to make sure there was enough formula for both of them, nights when she sat at the kitchen table counting coins to pay for electricity. The bills piled up like enemies she couldn't defeat, and yet each morning when she woke to the sight of her daughters smiling in their cribs, she found the strength to fight again. What hurt the most were the whispers. Other mothers at the park would glance at her worn clothes and tired face, whispering about how young she was, how foolish to have twins without a husband. Strangers sometimes asked bluntly where the father was, and every time she answered with silence, biting back the truth that still cut like glass. But in those moments, when Emily and Emma clutched at her fingers or pressed their tiny faces against her neck, Anna reminded herself that her daughters were not defined by absence but by the love she gave them every single day. Despite the hardships, there were moments of pure joy that carried her through. The first time Emily rolled over, Anna cried so hard she startled both girls, then laughed until her sides ached when Emma copied her sister only days later. Their first steps were wobbly and uncertain, but Anna was there on her knees with open arms, catching them as they tumbled and praising them as if they had conquered the world. Their laughter filled the apartment, echoing against the bare walls and making the space feel less lonely, transforming it into a home. Anna found pride in the smallest victories. She learned how to mend torn shoes, to cook filling meals from scraps, to stretch every dollar until it nearly tore. She sewed matching dresses from leftover fabric, smiling as she watched the girls twirl in front of the mirror, their brown hair flying, their brown eyes shining with delight. Sometimes she would pause, watching them, and feel a pang of bittersweet emotion. They looked so much like Andrew, and yet unlike him, their eyes carried warmth and innocence, not calculation. It was a daily reminder of what she had lost and what she had gained. At night, when the twins finally slept, Anna would sit by the window with a cup of tea, staring out at the quiet street. The fatigue pressed heavily on her, but so did a quiet pride. She had survived another day. Her girls were fed, safe, and loved. She thought back to the moment Andrew dismissed her, the words he had thrown at her as if she were nothing, and she realized he had been wrong. She was not worthless. She was a mother to two beautiful daughters who needed her, who gave her life a meaning deeper than any money or power could buy. As the years passed, Emily and Emma grew into curious, bright children who spoke in unison sometimes and shared an unshakable bond. Their laughter became Anna's anchor, their hugs her reward, their trust her salvation. Each struggle carved resilience into her, shaping her into a woman who could endure anything. She knew life would continue to test her, but as long as she had her daughters, she would never bow to despair. And though Andrew's world was one of glittering towers and ruthless ambition, untouched by their presence, Anna's world, filled with laughter, stories, scraped knees, and bedtime kisses, was far richer. She had lost the man she thought she loved, but she had gained a reason to live, and that made every sacrifice worth it. By the time Emily and Emma turned 8, their lives had settled into a rhythm that was both demanding and rewarding for Anna. The small apartment was still cramped, but now it overflowed with school projects, half-finished drawings taped to the walls, and books stacked in uneven piles. Every corner carried the imprint of the twins' presence, from the mismatched socks stuffed under the couch to the glitter glue stains on the kitchen table. Anna often laughed at the chaos, even when she was scrubbing markers off the walls, because it meant her daughters were growing, learning, and creating. For all the struggles of the past, she could not deny that their home was alive with love. The girls were inseparable yet distinct, two halves of the same whole with subtle differences that only Anna noticed. Emily was bold, often the first to volunteer in class or try something new, her curiosity pulling her forward with fearless energy. Emma, on the other hand, was quieter, thoughtful and observant, with a tenderness that made her protective of her sister and her mother. Together, they balanced each other, and Anna marveled at how they often seemed to communicate without words, sharing secret smiles or bursts of laughter that no one else could decipher. Their bond reminded her daily of the miracle she had been given, even if it came at a cost she had once thought unbearable. Anna's life was still a constant balancing act. She worked long hours at a small restaurant, waiting tables and helping in the kitchen when needed. The job was tiring and the pay modest, but it gave her just enough to cover rent, food, and school supplies. Some nights she returned home so exhausted that she could barely stand, yet she always found the strength to sit with her daughters, helping them with homework or listening as they recounted the adventures of their day. Their excitement, their stories about classmates and playground dramas, breathed life into her weary body and reminded her why she endured so much. Though money was always tight, Anna made sure her daughters never felt poor in spirit. She planned small adventures, picnics in the park, trips to the library, baking cookies together on weekends. She wanted them to see the world as bigger than the walls of their apartment, to believe they were capable of more than what their circumstances suggested. The girls thrived under her care, their teachers often praising their creativity and determination. Anna's heart swelled with pride each time she heard it, knowing that she was giving them what mattered most: love, stability, and the belief that they were valuable. Meanwhile, Andrew Miller's life existed in another universe entirely. His company had doubled its size, branching into new industries, and his face often appeared in glossy magazines accompanied by headlines about his brilliance and ruthlessness. He attended charity galas, cut ribbons at corporate launches, and traveled in private jets to destinations Anna had only ever seen in magazines. The man who had dismissed her and their unborn children all those years ago had built himself into a symbol of success. To the world, he was untouchable, admired, and envied. But Anna sometimes wondered, late at night when the apartment was quiet and the twins were asleep, whether he ever thought of her or of them. She told herself it didn't matter, that his absence had forced her to become stronger, but the thought still crept in uninvited. Did he ever regret the words he had said? Did he know that two little girls with his brown eyes and his determined spirit existed, laughing and learning and growing without him? She shook those thoughts away most of the time, but every once in a while, when Emily tilted her head just like Andrew once did or when Emma smiled in a way that mirrored him perfectly, Anna felt the sting of old wounds. Yet she would not allow bitterness to define her life. She focused instead on the present, on the girls' laughter, their milestones, and the simple joy of watching them grow into themselves. If Andrew had chosen power and money over family, then that was his loss, not theirs. She believed that one day, Emily and Emma would look back and see not the absence of a father, but the unbreakable strength of a mother who never gave up on them. Life carried on in this delicate balance, Anna working tirelessly, the twins thriving, and Andrew living in a world far removed from theirs. But fate had its own plans, and the carefully drawn lines between their worlds would not remain separate forever. The day was coming when Andrew Miller would look into the faces of the daughters he had denied, and the empire he had built would no longer be enough to shield him from the truth. It was on an ordinary afternoon, as Anna was clearing dishes from the restaurant tables after a long lunch shift, that her life took an unexpected turn. She was bone-tired, her hands rough from constant scrubbing and her back aching from hours of standing, when her manager approached her with an envelope. The paper was thick, the kind that smelled faintly of wealth and power, completely unlike the cheap mail that usually filled her box at home. "This is for you," her manager said, confusion in his voice. Anna frowned, wiping her hands on her apron before carefully taking it. She didn't recognize the return address, but her name was written clearly on the front, not misspelled as it often was on bills or flyers. That evening, after Emily and Emma had finished their homework and were sitting at the table sketching with crayons, Anna finally opened the envelope. Inside was a letter printed on elegant stationery with a gold emblem embossed at the top. She read it once quickly, then again more slowly, her heart racing. It was an invitation to a prestigious charity gala hosted at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. At first she thought there must have been a mistake, but as her eyes moved down the page, she saw the explanation. A school art competition had been held in collaboration with the foundation, and both Emily and Emma's drawings had been chosen to be displayed at the event as examples of outstanding creativity from young students. The letter explained that the children, along with their parent, were invited to attend the gala so the girls could be recognized for their achievements. Anna felt the world tilt slightly as she lowered the letter. The girls noticed her expression immediately, their identical brown eyes widening with curiosity. "What is it, Mom?" Emily asked, leaning across the table. Emma dropped her crayon, already eager for answers. Anna swallowed, trying to steady her voice, and read parts of the letter aloud. As she spoke about their drawings being displayed, both girls gasped, covering their mouths with their hands before breaking into squeals of delight. "We get to go to a fancy party?" Emma exclaimed, bouncing in her seat. Emily clapped her hands together, already asking what they would wear and if there would be music. Their excitement was infectious, and for a moment Anna smiled, her heart swelling with pride at their joy. But when she looked back at the letter, unease crept in. She knew the kind of people who attended events like this: wealthy businessmen, socialites, politicians, and the press. It was the very world Andrew belonged to, the world that had once chewed her up and spat her out when he dismissed her with cold laughter. A wave of anxiety coursed through her as she thought about stepping into that glittering environment with her daughters by her side. She pictured Andrew's face in her mind, the sharp line of his jaw, the piercing brown eyes that could command a room. What if he was there? What if fate decided to throw her past directly in front of her? Anna spent the next few days torn between pride and dread. On one hand, she wanted the girls to experience this honor. They had worked hard, pouring their imagination into their art, and they deserved to see it celebrated. On the other hand, she feared exposing them to the cruelty of the man who had once broken her spirit. But as she watched Emily and Emma chatter endlessly about the gala, about how they would stand beside their drawings, how they would eat fancy food, how they would show everyone what they had made, Anna knew she couldn't take the opportunity away from them just because of her own fear. They had earned this moment, and she would not let her past steal it. The week leading up to the gala was filled with preparations. Anna borrowed a simple but elegant dress from a friend, altering it late at night so it would fit her properly. For the girls, she managed to buy 2 identical second-hand dresses in soft lavender, washing and pressing them until they looked brand new. When Emily and Emma tried them on and twirled in front of the mirror, their faces glowed with excitement, and Anna's heart clenched with love. She didn't care that the dresses weren't designer or that her own gown wasn't new. What mattered was that her daughters would walk into that ballroom feeling special. The night of the event arrived, and as they stood outside the Grand Hotel, Anna felt her breath catch. The building glittered with lights, limousines lined the curb, and men in tuxedos escorted women in sparkling gowns through the revolving doors. Emily and Emma clung to her hands, their eyes wide with wonder, whispering about the chandeliers visible through the glass. Anna forced herself to straighten her shoulders, to walk forward with confidence, even as her stomach churned with nerves. She reminded herself that she was here for her daughters, that she would endure anything for their sake. What she didn't know as she stepped into the dazzling lobby was that Andrew Miller was already inside, his name emblazoned on the guest list, his empire intertwined with the very foundation hosting the evening. The collision of their worlds, 8 years in the making, was no longer avoidable. Anna's path and Andrew's were about to cross once more, and nothing, neither the walls he had built nor the strength she had forged, would remain unchanged after that night. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, chandeliers hanging like frozen constellations above the crowd of guests dressed in silk, velvet, and black-tie perfection. Waiters moved silently between tables with trays of champagne flutes, and the low hum of laughter and polite conversation filled the air. Anna stepped inside holding tightly to the hands of Emily and Emma, her breath catching in her throat as she tried to steady herself against the sheer extravagance of it all. The marble floor gleamed beneath her shoes, and the air smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume. She had been in this hotel before as an employee, carrying trays and washing dishes, but never like this. Tonight, she was not here to serve but to stand beside her daughters while their artwork was displayed for some of the most influential people in the city to see. Emily and Emma gasped in unison as they spotted the easels arranged along one side of the room, their bright drawings framed and standing proudly among pieces created by other children. They tugged on Anna's hands, pulling her closer, their eyes wide with wonder. Guests were already gathered around the exhibits, nodding appreciatively, some even smiling as they paused to look at the twins' colorful scenes of nature and family. Anna felt a swell of pride so strong it nearly choked her, but beneath it ran a current of unease she could not shake. She knew she was walking into the heart of the world Andrew ruled, and every glittering surface, every polished smile reminded her of him. On the other side of the ballroom, Andrew Miller stood in a small group of businessmen and investors, his posture as commanding as ever, his tailored suit cutting a perfect line. He listened with half an ear to the discussion about potential ventures, his mind wandering as it often did these days despite his efforts to control it. The laughter around him felt shallow, the deals predictable, the praise empty. He reached for a glass of champagne, his brown eyes scanning the room out of habit more than interest, and then he froze. Across the sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos, he saw a woman standing near the children's exhibit. Her blonde hair glowed under the chandelier, her blue eyes sharp and striking even from a distance. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, dragging up ghosts from the past, but then he noticed the 2 girls beside her. They were about 8 years old, their brown hair shining, their movements mirrored as they pointed at their drawings and whispered excitedly to each other. When one of them turned her head, Andrew's chest tightened violently. Her eyes were the same deep brown as his, framed by the same lashes, carrying a spark he recognized as his own. And then the second turned too, and the resemblance doubled, undeniable and crushing. He could not move. For years he had buried the memory of Anna, dismissing her as a mistake, a distraction he had eliminated for the sake of his empire. He had told himself he had been right, that cutting ties had protected him from weakness. But now, staring at the twins who so clearly bore his features, he felt the walls he had built around himself crack wide open. His throat went dry, and the conversation around him faded into nothing. He excused himself abruptly, ignoring the curious glances of his colleagues, and began to cross the ballroom. Anna felt it before she saw him, a ripple in the air, a tightening in her chest. She lifted her head and locked eyes with Andrew as he approached, tall and composed, yet visibly shaken in a way she had never seen before. Time seemed to fold in on itself, pulling her back to that office years ago, to the smirk on his face and the words that had shattered her, pregnant? How convenient. How much do you want? Her grip on Emily and Emma's hands tightened, and she instinctively stepped slightly in front of them, her body a barrier between her daughters and the man who had once dismissed their very existence. Anna, he said, his voice rough, his eyes fixed not on her but on the girls peeking curiously from behind her. For the first time in years, his confidence seemed stripped away, leaving only disbelief and something dangerously close to regret. Are they? His voice faltered, his composure slipping. Are they mine? Anna's jaw clenched, her blue eyes burning with a mixture of anger and pride. Yes, she said, her voice steady and clear despite the storm in her chest. Emily and Emma. Your daughters. The children you tried to buy away before they were even born. The word struck him harder than any blow ever had. He looked at the twins again, taking in every detail, the curve of their smiles, the tilt of their heads, the way they stood close to their mother as though they understood instinctively that she was their protector. His mind replayed that night in his office, his arrogance, his cruelty, and for the first time in his life, Andrew Miller, the man who commanded boardrooms and conquered markets, felt utterly powerless. Emily tugged lightly on Anna's dress, her voice quiet but curious. Mommy, who is that man? She asked, her brown eyes wide. Anna's throat tightened, but she forced her expression to remain calm for her daughter's sake. No one you need to know, she said softly, though her eyes never left Andrew's. The girls seemed satisfied with the answer, turning their attention back to their artwork, but Andrew's heart twisted painfully at the dismissal. Around them, the gala continued as if nothing monumental had happened, the music playing, the glasses clinking, the laughter ringing out. But for Anna and Andrew, the world had shifted irreversibly. He stood there, staring at the family he had abandoned, and she stood firm, her daughters behind her, stronger than she had ever been. And though neither said another word, both knew this encounter was not an ending. It was only the beginning of a reckoning that would change all of their lives forever. When Andrew left the ballroom that night, he did so in a haze that felt unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The music had kept playing, people had laughed and toasted as though nothing had shifted, yet inside him the carefully constructed order of his life had shattered. He sat in the back of his car, staring out at the blur of city lights, his chest tight and his mind racing with images of two little girls with brown hair and eyes that mirrored his own. He had spent years convincing himself that Anna's pregnancy was a complication, that dismissing her with money had been the right decision to protect his empire, but now he saw the truth in the simplest, rawest way possible. He had daughters, living and breathing, growing into people he had missed 8 entire years of. No deal, no skyscraper, no headline could erase that absence, and for the first time in his life he felt the weight of regret pressing down on him with suffocating force. The following days were torture. He went to his office, but the reports on his desk blurred into nonsense. His board members noticed his distraction, but no one dared confront him directly. He attended meetings, signed contracts, nodded at presentations, but all the while his mind replayed the moment Anna's eyes had locked on his across the ballroom. There had been no forgiveness there, no trace of the woman who had once looked at him with love. Instead, there was steel, a wall built from years of sacrifice and survival. And behind her, Emily and Emma had stood, 2 children who should have known him, who should have run into his arms, but who looked at him as though he were a stranger. The realization tore through him relentlessly, leaving him unable to sleep, pacing through his penthouse in the dead of night, asking himself how he could ever undo what had been done. It wasn't long before he made the choice to find them. He had resources, connections, influence that could uncover anything, but this time he used them not as weapons of control but as tools of desperation. Within days, he had the address of the small apartment where Anna lived with the twins. He sat in his car outside the building more than once, watching from a distance as Anna walked home from work with Emily and Emma at her side, their backpacks bouncing as they skipped, their voices carrying on the air. He saw the way they laughed together, the way Anna bent to kiss their heads as they chattered, and every glimpse carved him deeper. He should have been there for all of it, the first steps, the first words, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories. He had traded those moments for boardrooms and contracts, and now he understood the emptiness in a way that was unbearable. Finally, he could no longer stay in the shadows. One evening he climbed the worn stairs of the apartment building, his heart hammering with a nervousness he had never felt in hostile negotiations or under public scrutiny. He stood at the door, listening to the muffled sound of laughter inside, and raised his hand to knock. When the door opened, Anna stood before him, her expression immediately hardening. She looked different than she had years ago, more tired, more guarded, but stronger too. Her eyes, those piercing blue eyes, met his without flinching, and for a moment he felt like the man she had once known could see right through to the hollow shell he had become. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, her body angled to block his view inside. Andrew's throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak. "I need to talk," he said quietly, his voice stripped of the arrogance it usually carried. "Please." There was a long silence, filled with the sound of children's voices in the background, and then Sophia's, no, Emily's, small face peeked around her mother's side, followed quickly by Emma's. Both girls stared up at him curiously, their identical brown eyes wide and unguarded. The sight almost brought him to his knees. He swallowed hard and managed, I need to know them. I need a chance to try." Anna's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and pain. "Words are nothing to me, Andrew," she said sharply. "Do you think I haven't heard words before? You weren't there when they were sick, when they cried for a father I couldn't give them, when I worked myself to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. You weren't there for anything." Her voice trembled, but it was not weakness, it was fury honed by years of survival. "And now you come here and think you can say a few sentences and erase all of that?" Her words sliced through him, leaving no room for defense. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking as he admitted, "You're right. I wasn't there. I failed you, and I failed them. I can't change the past, but I want to change the future. I don't expect forgiveness, not from you, not from them. But I can't walk away again, not now that I know. Let me prove it. Not with money, not with gifts. With presence. With time." Anna studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she opened the door just enough to let the girls retreat back inside, before stepping out into the hallway with him. Her voice was quieter now, but firm. "If you mean a word of what you say, you'll show it, not speak it. They don't need promises. They need consistency. And if you fail them again, Andrew, you will not get another chance." With that, she closed the door, leaving him standing in the dim hallway, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, Andrew felt stripped of power, yet filled with a strange, humbling resolve. He had once believed that building an empire defined strength, but now he saw strength in the woman who had raised his daughters alone, and in the children who thrived without him. As he walked back down the stairs, he knew he was facing the hardest battle of his life, not for money, not for influence, but for the chance to be a father, and maybe, one day, for the chance to earn back the trust of the woman he had broken. Andrew returned to his penthouse that night carrying something far heavier than the weight of a long workday or the demands of his empire. He carried the echo of Anna's words, the memory of his daughter's eyes, and the gnawing realization that no amount of money or power could undo the years he had missed. The silence of his home pressed down on him like a punishment. The glass walls that once gave him pride now only reminded him of how far he stood from the warmth he had glimpsed inside that modest apartment where Emily and Emma lived. He could not sleep, and for the first time in his life he did not try to drown his restlessness in work. Instead, he lay awake imagining the moments he had forfeited, first words, first steps, birthdays filled with laughter he had not been there to hear. In the weeks that followed, Andrew began to show up. Not with grand gestures that could be dismissed as shallow displays of wealth, but with steady, deliberate actions. He asked Anna if he could walk the girls to school, and though she hesitated at first, she allowed it with sharp warnings in her eyes. He took their small hands in his, nervous and clumsy as he tried to match their chatter, answering questions about why the sky was blue or how tall buildings were built. At first the girls were cautious, regarding him with polite curiosity rather than affection, but Andrew did not falter. He walked them every morning he could, returned every afternoon when Anna allowed, and learned the small details of their lives that meant everything to them: Emily's love for drawing animals, Emma's fascination with stories of faraway places. Evenings were harder, filled with awkward silences as he tried to fit into a world that had been whole without him. He sat at Anna's kitchen table helping with homework, fumbling over spelling words while Emily giggled at his mistakes, and patiently listening as Emma explained a math problem with surprising confidence. He learned how to cook pancakes badly, burning the first few until the girls laughed and insisted they tasted good anyway. He let them braid his hair with colorful ribbons, enduring their laughter as Anna stood back, arms crossed, hiding a smile she didn't want him to see. These small, imperfect moments chipped away at the walls between them, and for Andrew, each laugh, each shared glance, each hug from the twins felt like redemption. Anna watched carefully, her heart torn between the memory of his cruelty and the evidence of his change. She could not erase the nights she had cried alone, the days she had fought exhaustion while raising 2 children without help. Forgiveness did not come easily, but she could not deny that the man sitting on the floor with ribbons in his hair and laughter in his eyes was not the same one who had sneered at her 8 years ago. She reminded herself daily that he had to prove himself not to her but to their daughters, and she measured him by the steadiness of his presence. To her surprise, he did not falter. The turning point came one evening when Emily fell from the playground swing and scraped her knee badly. Anna rushed forward, but Andrew was already there, kneeling beside his daughter, his face pale with worry. He cleaned the wound carefully, his hands shaking as he tried to soothe her tears, and then lifted her gently into his arms. As Emily clung to his neck, whispering through her sobs that it hurt, Andrew's eyes met Anna's across the park. In them, she saw fear, regret, and love so raw that it pierced through her defenses. It was then she realized he wasn't pretending. For the first time, he was truly present. Months passed, and slowly the family began to heal. The girls started to look for Andrew when he entered the room, tugging at his hands and begging him to join their games. They drew pictures of him along with their mother, slipping them shyly into his hands, and he kept every one, storing them in a drawer in his office as if they were the most valuable contracts he had ever signed. Anna still held her guard, but she could not ignore the joy in her daughter's eyes, or the way they were thriving with their father in their lives. One evening, Andrew invited Anna and the twins to his yacht, not for a party or spectacle, but simply for time together. The setting sun painted the sky in gold and crimson, and the girls leaned against the railing, their hair glowing in the light, their laughter ringing across the deck. Andrew stood beside Anna, his gaze not on the horizon but on the family he had almost lost. His voice was quiet, stripped of pride. "I was a fool, Anna. I thought money and power were everything. I thought love made me weak. But I see now that I was wrong. These girls, you, this life, it's the only thing that matters. I can't change what I did, but I can choose who I am now. And I choose to be here. With you. With them." Every day. Anna looked at him for a long time, the waves crashing gently below them, the cries of the gulls filling the silence. She did not answer with words, but when Emily and Emma ran back and grabbed their hands, pulling them both toward the bow of the yacht, she did not let go. And Andrew, feeling the warmth of their fingers intertwined with his, knew that forgiveness might not yet be fully his, but hope was. As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Andrew realized he had finally built something greater than any empire, something he had once dismissed as weakness but now understood as strength. It was not skyscrapers or wealth or power. It was family. And this time, he would never let it slip away again.